started, and hopefully he'll be here shortly. So this evening's a public hearing regarding SP-2-24 the Overfall Preserve, formerly known as the Warrington Property. The site plan for the construction of 90 townhomes with amenities and site improvements. The properties are located at 1147 Savannah Road and are identified on Sussex County tax maps as parcels 335-8.00-3600, 36.01, and 36.02. These properties are zoned R5. So since Janelle's not here, I don't know, should we have Alex give us a little introduction?
Sure, absolutely.
Perfect.
So embedded in the agenda is a summary of the Planning Commission's decision in this matter. So I won't go over it in detail, but the Planning Commission's recommendation is incorporated into the record here. That's properly part of your consideration here. So on January 29th of this year, the LPC by majority vote recommended that preliminary approval be granted for the application, subject to 25 conditions of approval. And the LPC also recommended approval of 2 requests by the applicant for waivers from certain city code requirements. So that's a very basic summary of the situation. And you can hear from the public as well as the applicant. This is the time to develop the record.
So I think since we have these 25 conditions as well as the 2 waiver requests, let's ask the applicant to maybe make a presentation about these 25 conditions, the waiver requests, where there might be some common ground, where you may have concerns, and we can go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, members of the Town Council. Thank you, Alex, for the introduction. For the record, my name is David Hutt. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Morris James out of Georgetown. This afternoon or evening, I'm representing Breakwater Partners, LLC, which is the applicant that requested this site plan review as the contract purchaser of the property. With me here to help answer any questions that may arise is Joe Reed. He's sitting a couple rows back. He's principal with Breakwater Partners, LLC. As I mentioned, the contract purchaser and potential developer of the property. Right behind me is Zach Crouch, a professional engineer with Davis, Bowen, and Friedel, who are the project engineers. And maybe impossible to see behind me, but to my right, your left, is Dawn Ridgey, a professional engineer and the senior traffic engineer with Davis, Bowen, and Friedel. This afternoon, we are here for a public hearing for the site plan review for Overfall Preserve. Of course, the property is more often known, I think, in Lewis, at least for many years, as the Warrington Property. And that was certainly just because of the name of the ownership of that property. And then, as is always the case with a project like this, you submit names to the Sussex County Geographic Information Office, and then they approve a name or tell you you need a different name. And in this case, that name is Overfall Preserve, which is certainly why we are here this afternoon. The property consists of 3 tax parcels that total 12.67 acres of land. And I think all of you will remember, not everyone had the exact role that they have now, but everyone that's here certainly will remember that the history of this project starts in November of 2023. In November of 2023, an annexation petition was filed with the town seeking to annex the Warrington property, as it was known then, into the municipal limits of the city of Lewis. That annexation petition followed through with the city's process, including a workshop with the mayor and council, and then the council appointed an annexation committee. Some of you were members on that annexation committee and participated in the meetings. Ultimately, the annexation committee voted 3-0 to approve that and suggested some zoning classifications as part of that recommendation. Ultimately, in April of 2024, the annexation was completed. The Warrington property, those 3 tax parcels were added into the municipal limits of the city of Lewis and were assigned a zoning classification of R5 at that time. little less than 3 months later, at the beginning of July, a preliminary site plan was filed with the city, with Ms. Cornwell's office, and frankly, that's the site plan that we're here on this afternoon as part of that process. As part of that process, the Planning Commission conducted a public hearing, just like the one we are in the midst of experiencing right now, on October 15th of last year. The Planning Commission then had further discussion about the application during November and January, and as Mr. Burns indicated, ultimately made its recommendation that he quickly summarized on January 29th of this year. Mm-hmm. One thing I wanted to address at the very outset of this public hearing is the good faith that the applicant has undertaken as part of this process. And that's in two particular ways. First, and this was outlined and detailed in the January 24th letter that I submitted to the Planning Commission when it reopened the public record during its January 15th meeting. But if you read that letter carefully, you see that I explained several procedural irregularities that had occurred before the Planning Commission, which included the imposition of a never discussed time limit on the applicant's presentation at the October 15th public hearing, allowing the introduction of additional information after the record was closed, and ultimately I believe that's why the record was then reopened, was as a curative effort in that matter. And then there's the issue of the timing of the Planning Commission's recommendation itself, and how the time periods that are set forth in the city's code, and how it's the applicant's position that those were not met. Despite those arguments that again are set forth in more detail in that letter, and despite those irregularities, my client certainly, we're here this evening and we want to pursue this preliminary site plan approval and move forward with the 90 townhomes that were introduced just a moment ago. The second part of the applicant's good faith efforts in this matter relate to what I just talked about a moment ago, which was the project itself, the use of the property and its density, and the annexation process. As you'll recall, one of the primary concerns that everyone on the council had during the annexation process was the number of uses that could be afforded a property with the R5 zoning designation and the density that the R5 zoning designation allows for as a matter of right. The allowed density, of course, impacts the city, its projections, its analysis, and all of the advantages and disadvantages. Those of you that were on the committee recall the reports itemizing and detailing the various advantages and disadvantages to the potential annexation of the property into the city limits. That ultimately was reported back through the annexation committee's report to the mayor and council. And all of that is also detailed in my letter dated November 1st of last year to the Planning Commission. The 90-unit plan that we're talking about here this evening, with its net density of 8.9 units to the acre, is entirely consistent with what was explained to this council during the annexation committee process, except for one thing. It's at the very lowest edge of what was explained to the annexation committee during that process. As you'll recall, the question kept coming up as the city ran its projections and analysis. There were direct questions to myself and to the developer as to what was the use going to be and how many units do you anticipate. The answer consistently since 2003 has been a townhome project consisting of 90 to 100 townhomes. The project that you have in front of you this afternoon, as you know, is for 90 townhomes, which is lower than all of the projections and analysis that the city performed during the annexation process, which were all based on 100 units being part of the Overfall Preserve, or the Warrington Property project, as it was known before the name was assigned to it. On another note about site plan approval, and I think that some of this raised itself during the public hearing before the Planning Commission, a site plan approval is what the law refers to as a ministerial or quasi-judicial proceeding. And what that means is that the town does not have legislative discretion to deny an application if it meets the code requirements. and that the town has the ability to impose conditions that have reasonable nexus to the town's legitimate concerns, so long as they are not arbitrary and capricious. And that compares to instances where the town does have legislative discretion, which is, for example, if there was a change of zone application in front of mayor and council, deputy mayor and council this evening, then the town has discretion as to, is this what our comprehensive plan says? Is this what the zoning code calls for? But that's not what we're here on tonight. Tonight's question is, was this site plan developed in accordance with the guidance that's provided within the city's governing documents? And obviously we think that it was, and we would ask that ultimately the mayor and city council approve the site plan with some modifications to the conditions that were recommended by the Planning Commission. With that background regarding this matter, I did want to review some of the details, and if we could go to slide 3. We don't have, okay, we won't go to slide 3. As the city is aware, there are some planning tools that are put forward by both at the state level and then of course at the city level as well. With respect to the state of Delaware, the Office of State Planning Coordination promulgates a state strategies map, as it's called, every 5 years. And the most recent one is 2020. The state's actually in the process right now of updating that, and I'm sure we'll be consulting with mayor and council regarding the state strategies for the municipal limits and the immediate boundaries around the city of Lewis. This property, and the image you were going to see was the state strategies map showing that this property is within level 1 on the state strategies map. And level 1 designations are areas where state policy and spending anticipates plans for and funds growth in the near-term future. This project was reviewed by the Office of State Planning Coordination through its PLUS process. And the Office of State Planning Coordination stated as follows: this project is located in a level 1 investment area, which is consistent with the 2020 strategies for state policies and spending. The site is also located in the city of Lewis. Investment level 1 reflects areas that are already developed in an urban or suburban fashion, where infrastructure is existing or readily available, and where future redevelopment or infill projects are expected and encouraged by state policy. Development in level 1 is consistent with the 2020 strategies for state policies and spending. Therefore, the Office of State Planning Coordination has no objections to this subdivision/site plan, provided it meets the relevant codes and ordinances of the city of Lewis. That's at the state level. Within the city, of course, you have the comprehensive plan that helps to guide and direct the decision making. Its future land use map indicates that this property is within a residential area, one of your future land use map categories, and certainly townhomes are a residential use consistent with the comprehensive plan. This is also consistent with the city's zoning map. The city's zoning map describes these parcels as being within the mixed residential R5 zoning classification, which was assigned, as we talked about, during the annexation process. And as you know, this is the same zoning classification as exists for a number of the surrounding properties that are immediately adjacent to this and then even a little further away. Looking at the property at a very high level, there are no wetlands located on the property, and it is entirely outside of the 100-year floodplain. With respect to traffic, which we'll get into in a little more detail, but at a very high level at this moment, DelDOT reviewed this project during the PLUS review process as part of the Office of State Planning Coordination's review, and then at a pre-submittal meeting that was scheduled specifically for this project. And within the project materials that are embedded in the agenda, what you saw there was that the traffic generated pursuant to this 90-unit townhome project based on DelDOT's ITE manual and development coordination, that it qualifies for payment of an area-wide study fee in lieu of doing a traffic impact study. That is set forth in the plus comments, but it's also detailed in the memorandum, in what's called an area-wide study fee and offsite improvement memorandum from DelDOT. And it's important to note at this outset, and again, I'm sure this will be a topic that we discuss in a little more detail as we move forward, but Dutchman's Avenue, which is a city street that connects to Savannah Road, was designed to accommodate Overfall Preserve, the project we're here on tonight, Dutchman's Harvest, as well as travelers who live in the lodge at Historic Lewis that want to make their way to Savannah Road. Again, it was always intended, planned, and designed for all of those three projects to utilize Dutchman's Avenue to access Savannah Road. During the Planning Commission public hearing, and hopefully this afternoon can jump out in front of a couple of these issues. During the Planning Commission, there were three things that came up that were discussed at some length during the public hearing. The first was the purpose of the R5 mixed residential zoning district. And there was concern that the purpose was not satisfied by a 90-unit townhome community. And the purpose that's set forth in the zoning code states that the purpose is to provide for a mix of housing types to include multifamily and affordable housing alternatives. When you look at the table of dimensional regulations that exists in the code describing the permitted uses, which is the permitted housing types within the R5 district, those include the following: dwelling attached, dwelling detached, dwelling multiple family, dwelling townhouse, dwelling two-family, and dwelling single-family detached, including modular and manufactured. As you can see, the R5 lives up to its name as a mixed residential housing district, because that's pretty much all of the housing options that exist within the code. But this is the mix of permissible housing types within that zoning district. It doesn't mean that if you have a property, it has to include one of every one of those. It just means that within that zoning district, those are the housing options a person has to select from. When you look at the zoning map, you can see that this is borne out because there's a singular type of housing that exists on the adjacent properties with the R5 zoning classification. For example, there's a single form of housing on Dutchman's Harvest, the Hulling Cove Annex, Henlopen Gardens, Jefferson Apartments, and even the single-family homes that are in the R5 district along Beach Plum Drive. They're all one type of housing within that R5 district. The same as is proposed as part of this application. Another sort of surprising concern that was expressed during the Planning Commission public hearing was that these proposed townhomes would not match the character of the area in which they'd be located. And I said it was surprising because this is certainly a mixed-use area within the city's limits. There are single-family homes, townhomes, multifamily buildings, commercial uses, and even institutional uses that exist right in this immediate area between Savannah Road and Kings Highway. And more specifically, if you want to talk about what borders or the boundaries of this exact property, these three tax parcels, the property is bordered to the north by a brewery, looking at the rear of that brewery that faces Savannah Road. Of course, everyone would recognize the Lewis Brewing Company. Its boundary that we've already talked about involves high-density, affordable housing, Dutchman's Harvest, and then luxury age-restricted housing. Of course, the lodge at Historic Lewis. Those are both exist to the west. Continuing to move around the property, there's a shopping center to the south. And I don't know what the real name of the shopping center is, but we all identify it as the Mr. P's Shopping Center. that one use apparently has named the shopping center. And then, of course, there's an undeveloped parcel that is outside, not within the city's municipal limits, and that is most often referred to as the Plummer property, and we'll talk about the Plummer property again in a few minutes here, and that's to the east. All of those existing uses show the nature of this area, and these proposed townhomes provide a transition with a very similar housing style from Dutchman's Harvest just at a lower density, about half the density, as you get closer to the city and head to the east. And I mentioned the word density because that was another subject that was discussed discussed at the Planning Commission meeting at some length. What was said is that this is a high-density project, and I would dispute that statement and say that whether you're looking at this project just generally in the sense of density, set aside the city of Lewis, but globally, I don't believe that 8 units to the acre would qualify as a high-density project, but more specifically in the context of the city of Lewis, because certainly that's where the property is located, it certainly does not qualify as high density. When you look at the zoning code and the densities that are allowed within the city of Lewis zoning code. In fact, the R5 mixed residential zoning district allows for a much greater density than what is proposed for this project, which, as council will recall, was that initial concern that I talked about at the outset. That was the concern, is that the density that's permitted in the R5 district is a high density. When you look at that table of dimensional regulations that I mentioned a moment ago and described all the various types of dwellings that are permitted within the R5 district, the maximum density is based on 1,250 square feet per unit. The math on that is 34.8 units to the acre is the maximum density that's allowed within the R5 district. The gross density for Overfall Preserve is just a touch over 7 units to the acre, 7.1. And if you remove the streets and right-of-way dedications that are going to be made and that reduces the acreage by almost a little over 2 acres, then the net density is 8.9 units to the acre. This means that the gross density that I just described is 20% of the allowable density for this property, and the net density is 25% of the allowable density for the property. Under either evaluation, whether we talk about gross density or net density, the proposed density is a quarter of the allowable density, and certainly not any type of maximization of the allowable density under the R5 zoning classification for this property. In addition, the proposed density for Overfalls Preserve, as I mentioned a moment ago, is less than half the density of the neighboring Dutchman's Harvest community. When you review the recorded site plan for Dutchman's Harvest, it shows a gross density of 16.3 units to the acre. And again, if you subtract out the right-of-way dedications and those types of things, you can, that reduces the acreage of the property by a little over an acre. And then the net density of the project is 19.2 units to the acre. Thus, both the gross density and the net density of Overfall Preserve are less than half the density of the adjacent Dutchman's Harvest community. With that overview of some of the sort of what I call higher level concerns that were raised during the prior public hearings and discussion, I wanted to review the site plan and the 2 waiver requests that exist for the Overfall Preserve project. On the screen, you can see the site plan for the project, and I will just start right at the entrance to the community. As I mentioned a moment ago, the entrance is off of a city street, Dutchman's Avenue. If it hasn't been dedicated by Dutchman's Harvest, will be dedicated by Dutchman's Harvest to the city of Lewis. And then both Overfall Preserve and Dutchman's Harvest will both have their entrances off of this Dutchman's Avenue city street. That shared entrance is presently available to use. As you know, construction is ongoing at the Dutchman's Harvest project. And as I mentioned a moment ago, actually, if we go to slide 6. And slide 6 that is on the screens there is just simply the color rendering of what we were just looking at a moment ago. As I mentioned, the entrance off of Dutchman's Avenue was designed for Dutchman's Harvest, the Lodge at Historic Lewis, and whatever the future development, and now we know that potentially that could be Overfall Preserve. It was designed for all three of those. In fact, there's an agreement in place regarding the shared construction cost for Dutchman's Avenue regarding the shared cost of that entrance because it was always planned and designed for all of these properties. You can also see when you come in the community off of Dutchman's Avenue and make a left into the community, there are two buildings on the left that are townhome units. Between those two is a connection to the Junction and Breakwater Trail that exists and is proposed. It was proposed as a 6-foot wide connection point, and the Planning Commission recommended that that be widened to a 10-foot width. As if you continue traveling throughout the community, you can see that it leads to the balance of all of the various townhomes. There are various sizes or groups of townhomes or sticks of townhomes that range from 3 in a group or set to 4, 5, and even 6. The only ones that aren't on that internal road network are the first 6 as you enter in, and if you were to travel straight on Dutchman's Avenue, and those are where the cursor is located presently. As you can see, there's a stormwater pond that is centrally located on the property that is proposed to be surrounded by a walking trail with benches. And that walking trail would connect to the sidewalk network, and there are sidewalks that are on both sides of all of these streets, except for there will be one that we'll talk about in the waiver request where there would not be sidewalks on both sides of the street. The stormwater management pond will be an infiltration pond with the appropriate plantings as required. The outfall for the stormwater management pond is the stormwater management pond that exists at the front of Dutchman's Harvest that you can see on the lower left-hand side of the plot that's on the screens. That pond was designed to be the outfall for this project, similar to how the entrances were designed. Of course, stormwater management would ultimately be reviewed by the Sussex Conservation District as part of any final site plan approval. The amenities for the project include the previously mentioned walking paths, benches, and then you can see on the screen there's the blue area sort of on the far right-hand side, which signals a pool. There would be an accompanying pool house. That is another one of the amenities for the community. If we can go to slide 7. This slide shows the different open space as they're classified within the town's zoning code. And I know that this often becomes a question, and so I asked Davis Boner Friedel to prepare this exhibit with the various colors to show how it's been calculated and how it matches the town's code. The town's requirements for section 1 for open space are found in section 170-26E. And there's a requirement that there be 20% open space, which would be a little over 2.5 acres in this context. What you see on the screens is 36% open space, which is approximately 4.5 acres, which again is a little 2 acres more open space than is required. When you read further in the code, it requires contiguous open space of 40%, which in the context of this application would be a little over 1 acre. There is 70% open space, which is a little more than 3 acres, again exceeding that by 2 acres on this application. If you move forward, there needs to be what's classified or categorized as community open space. It's a term in the code, and that's supposed to be 20%, which would be about 1/2 acre. And that is shown here as 23%, or a little over 1 acre, essentially doubling that term, community open space, from the code. If we can move to slide 8, which is back to the rendering. This site plan shows both vehicular and pedestrian interconnectivity between Overfall Preserve and the surrounding properties. With respect to pedestrian interconnectivity, there's the previously mentioned connection to the Rails to Trails path that exists between the first two buildings as you enter on the left. Moving to the other side of the community, there's also a proposed pedestrian connection to the adjacent Cunningham property that exists and is shown. As that property is redeveloped when DelDOT completes the Kings Highway improvements, it is planned for there to be a new shopping center on that property that'll be moved back further away from where it exists presently. And as part of that, there'd be a pedestrian connection to this property that is proposed. With respect to vehicular interconnectivity, there's of course the entrance off of Dutchman's Avenue. That is a shared entrance with Dutchman's Harvest. And then there's a proposed stub road we talked about it before, the Plummer property, which is a property that is not within the municipal limits presently. And that could ultimately, if it's ever annexed and developed, provide another point of connection to Kings Highway, as that is Kings Highway is the road that the Plummer property has frontage on. As I mentioned, there would be sidewalks and street lights on both sides of the street and connections to the shared use path, both the Rails to Trails path as well as the shared use path that exists along Savannah Road. If you looked in the materials, and we won't look at it on the screens, but there is a photometric analysis that is included showing the proposed street lights and how they would light the community during the evening hours. This evening, I did not plan on reviewing all the bulk area, lot size, and other requirements that are set forth in the code. When you looked at the materials, you likely saw that Ms. Cornwell prepared a very detailed memorandum in which she went item by item through the various requirements that are set forth within the town code and explained how this preliminary plan met each of those requirements. One of the concerns in probably every application, every land use application, is tree removal. That's always a subject of great concern, and this property has no treed or forested area, so it has the opposite concern here this evening. And frankly, it's going to be addressed, well addressed, as there's approximately 435 trees that are proposed to be planted on this 12.6 acres, and that is done to meet the tree density requirement that's found in the code. You also, in addition to that, you have your street tree requirement, and then because the property, the Plummer property, is in agricultural use, there's an agricultural buffer that's required, and so there are trees that are required in that. When you put all of those various components that are found in your code together, that results in a project or in a property that has no trees moving to a property that has 435 trees through the process of developing it. With that sort of high-level review of the site plan, I did want to review the two waiver requests. The first is found in section 170-27B, subsection 13, further subsection C and 1. And that is the subsection that requires sidewalks to be on both sides of the street. If we could stay on the site plan, thank you. And as I mentioned a moment ago, there are sidewalks on both sides of the street except for that first building if you stay straight on Dutchman's Avenue. And the reason for this request is in order to be able to provide some landscaping in the limited area that exists between Overfall Preserve and Dutchman's Harvest, where the cursor is presently located. There would be a sidewalk on the townhome side of this roadway, but not on the opposite side, which makes sense as there wouldn't be a need for a sidewalk on that side, as it's the backs of the homes in Dutchman's Harvest, and there would be a sidewalk for the folks in Overfall Preserve. The second waiver requirement related specifically to the width of the roadway, and in the code, section 170-27, subsection B, further subsection 6A, A development with a density greater than 4 units to the acre is required to have a minimum right-of-way width of 54 feet and a minimum paving width of 26 feet. The waiver request is to have the right-of-way reduced from 54 feet to 50 feet, but then to provide the city and Board of Public Works with 8 feet outside of that on either side, effectively providing 66 feet for the street trees and utilities. And this is being done, again, this doesn't narrow the paved area of the roadway. And the engineers at Davis, Bowen, and Friedel met with the Board of Public Works, and the Board of Public Works had no objection to this configuration and proposed arrangement because it, excuse me, it still afforded enough width for the street, the utilities, and the street trees that are being provided. At its meeting on January 29th, 2025, the Planning Commission, by majority vote, provided a recommendation with its position regarding the 2 waiver requests that we just described, as well as 25 conditions. If we can move to the next page. As I've done before, I know that the council is familiar with these spreadsheets or charts. This is a spreadsheet that has each of the Planning Commission's recommendations, whether it's for the waiver request or a condition, as well as, that's on the left-hand column. The right-hand column is the applicant's response to that. And for the benefit of those on the council, I do have a printed version, so you don't need to be looking or trying to see what it is on the screen. This afternoon, I thought it would be easiest to start with the 2 waiver requests, which the Planning Commission recommended be approved for this site plan. And not surprisingly, the applicant is not requesting any changes to that recommendation. And those are the first 2 items on the spreadsheet that you see. Some of these conditions I'm going to go through very rapidly, and then others will take a little more time. Condition 1 established a time period for the construction of amenities, specifically the 40th building permit. The applicant agreed and does not propose any changes. Condition 2 required compliance with the city's maximum lot coverage. I think that is the one thing on the site plan that was not identical to the city's code. That was noted by the Planning Commission, and that is a requirement that that be brought into compliance. As a little side note, I would note that the reason that that is different than what the city's code is because the city's code changed with respect to lot coverage while this project was in the annexation process. And this site plan was being prepared during the annexation process. The lot coverage requirement was 60%, and it moved to 55% almost about a month prior to the site plan having been filed. So the Planning Commission's recommendation is, of course, that the code be followed and that the 55% lot coverage be followed. And the applicant does not propose any change to that and agrees with that. The third condition requires the applicant to establish a property owners association to be responsible for open space and amenities, and the applicant agrees and does not propose any changes to that. The fourth condition that was proposed by the Planning Commission describes street lighting and specifically talks about motion sensors and dimming between midnight and dawn. And the applicant proposes what I think is a simpler version of that. Certainly the applicant has to install street lights for the streets with an overfall preserve, but proposes that the condition be modified to simply state that the street lights shall comply with the requirements of the Board of Public Works, whether that be the type of street light or any features or characteristics, whether that be dimming or motion sensors. And the reason for this is fairly simple. As I mentioned, after initial construction and installation, these will ultimately be turned over and become the maintenance responsibility of the Board of Public Works. And thus the standard here should be whatever the standard is that the Board of Public Works is using throughout the city of Lewis, which is what the applicant's response to this condition was attempting to capture. The fifth condition states that the developer must match the design and plantings at Dutchman's Harvest within the corridor buffer along Savannah Road. That there's a tiny piece of land that exists on Overfall Preserve that does come out and touch Savannah Road, and certainly the applicant has no objection or concerns regarding matching those plantings within the corridor buffer. Condition 6 requires the developer to install no parking signs in the turnaround areas of the dead-end streets. The applicant agrees and does not propose any changes to that. Condition 7 requires the walking path amenity with the walking paths within the walking path amenity to have a width of 8 feet, and the applicant agrees and does not propose a change to that. Condition 8 indicates that the walking path within the walking path amenity, the same path, be constructed of pervious material, and again, no change is proposed to that condition. Condition 9 is the walking path that would exist between those first two buildings on the left that we looked at when we looked at the site plan. That is the walking path that connects the sidewalk network within Overfall Preserve to the Rails to Trails path that runs along between this community and the properties that are immediately to the north. The proposed change here has no objection. Again, the applicant proposed 6 feet. The Planning Commission wanted 10 feet. The proposed change does not impact the width of that, but rather than saying that it would have to be a pervious material, the applicant would propose that the material be consistent and match either the sidewalk material or the material for the Rails to Trails, so that a person, whether it's a pedestrian or a cyclist, has one consistent surface as they maneuver from the sidewalk to this connection point back to the Rails to Trails or vice versa. Condition 10 proposed a list of additional amenities and identified some specific locations regarding unit numbers throughout the community, and the applicant agrees and has no proposed changes to that. Condition 11 states that the trees planted in the agricultural buffer shall be preserved even if the agricultural buffer is no longer required. Obviously, the Planning Commission is thinking about should the Plummer property ever be annexed into the city and then developed, that would leave another buffer between Overfall Preserve and whatever future project was, and the applicant agrees and no changes proposed. Condition 11. Condition 12 requires the developer to undertake an identification level archaeological survey report and then provide those findings to the planning department. As you can see, if you look at the screens, the applicant's response is to request that this condition be deleted. And that's for two primary reasons. The first is, this is one of those instances where the city code has a provision. It was reflected within Ms. Cornwell's report to the Planning Commission. And in her report dated October 10th, 2024, she stated that pursuant to section 170-26F, the site is identified as having a moderate probability of containing archaeological resources. An archaeological review is required for properties with a high probability of containing archaeological resources. An archaeological review is not required. So the code does not require an archaeological review of the property. And the second reason is that the surrounding properties, some of which have been recently developed, including the Lodge at Historic Lewis and Dutchman's Harvest, did not have to undertake an archaeological review. And during construction of those projects, nothing has been found that would lead someone to think that, well, now we should investigate the Warrington property or Overfall Preserve. So again, the code does not require it, and other immediately adjacent projects have not been required to. Condition 13 relates to the types of trees or species of trees, more specifically, to be planted. As noted, there are 435 trees, so there's going to be plenty of variety and plenty of each of the species that are planted. This project did go through the Parks and Recreation Committee that provided 5 recommendations. The Planning Commission actually disagreed with some of those recommendations, and those differences are set forth in Condition 13. Irrespective of which list of trees, the applicant is fine with the list of trees that the Planning Commission proposed, and it doesn't propose any changes to that list. Condition 14 is similar, but it relates to tree size or caliper. and the applicant does not propose any changes to that condition. Condition 15 is a condition requiring the construction of an opaque 6-foot-tall fence at the property line behind units 1 through 12, which are the first two sets of units, and you come in to the left, the units that have that walking and path connection between the two buildings. And again, as we've noted, this is a good idea as far as fencing and screening, because there is a difference in uses that it will exist. What's proposed is a residential townhome use, and of course on the other side of the walking path is commercial uses that front on Savannah Road, and that the applicant agrees and is not proposing any change to that condition. Condition 16 relates to connecting pathways, the walking paths and sidewalks, and doing that with ADA compliant curbing. And certainly the applicant agrees and is not proposing any change to that. Condition 17 describes very specifically reflecting the architectural character of the city and requires 5 different architectural styles within the entirety of the project, and then that each set or stick of townhomes, as they're often called, have a minimum of 2 architectural styles within each of those. In response to that, I would note that this property is not within the historic district of the city of Lewis, and this is an architectural requirement and is not part of a site plan review as that is set forth within the zoning code. Having said that, the applicant agrees that a mix of products and architectural styles will enhance the overall plan for Overfall Preserve. So what is proposed in the applicant's response is to keep those baseline requirements of 5 architectural styles and 2 within each set of townhomes, but remove the references to architectural character and historical character. Again, that's not this area of the city, and frankly, if we're going to mimic exactly what's around us, it's the Lodge at Historic Lewis and then townhomes at Dutchman's Harvest are the nearest uses along our western boundary, and those I don't believe are what the Planning Commission intended as the historical character of the city of Lewis. Condition 18 relates to the proposed interconnectivity with the Plummer property, and that condition requires that there be right-of-way available, including construction easements, that they need to be provided should the interconnection in the future ever be possible. Again, that's only possible likely if there's an annexation and a project that comes forward within the Plummer property, and the applicant agrees and proposes no change to that. Condition 19 similarly relates to that point of interconnection with the Plummer property and requires signage about that future interconnectivity, and certainly no changes proposed to that. Condition 20 is not really a condition in the truest sense of a condition, as it expressly concludes within its language that it is an encouragement to target homes within 80 to 120% of area median income. Because it's not a condition per se, I would suggest that there should be a third category of things if that is going to be it. It's certainly not a condition like provide signage at this point in the project. And while affordable housing is an important issue, the density that's proposed with Overfall Preserve does not support having affordable housing or workforce housing, as it's often referred to, as part of this project. As the city knows from affordable housing projects, most notably the one immediately adjacent to this, Dutchman's Harvest, in order for there to be an affordable housing component to a community, much higher densities are required given the value of land in the city of Lewis. As I reviewed at the outset, Dutchman's Harvest has a gross density of 16.3 units to the acre and a net density of 19.2 units to the acre. Overfall Preserve density is less than half of that density, which if there was going to be an affordable or workforce housing component, that density would necessarily have to increase significantly in order to be able to accommodate that. And as I mentioned, as part of the plan for this, it was thought that this transition as a person comes into town off of Savannah Road from the high density that would exist at Dutchman's Harvest to 8 units to the acre that would exist at Overfall Preserve, and then lead into the other existing lots and uses that are within the municipal limits as you travel east and approach the bay. Condition 21 indicates that the applicant should attempt to finalize an agreement with Dutchman's Harvest and the Lodge at Historic Lewis to provide interconnectivity. And as you can see, the applicant requests that this condition be deleted in its entirety, as no agreement is necessary because it was what was always planned and what was always provided for. And we see this in at least 3 specific ways. And if we could look at slide 16. Slide 16 is the record plan. It's recorded in plot book 368, page 41, the Recorder of Deeds office. In the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you can see the orange highlighting, and that is the list of conditions of approval for Dutchman's Harvest. Condition 4, which I'm sure no one can read from their seats, I will read for you, states that the comprehensive plan encourages the importance of interconnectivity. Thus, the applicant shall keep interconnections between the 2 developments, parenthetically Dutchman's Harvest and the assisted living facility, open and accessible such that both developments have access to both Kings Highway and Savannah Road. And if we turn to the next page or flip to the next page, you will see I've highlighted on this, maybe you won't see. There are a number I'll start in the upper left-hand corner. The upper left-hand corner talks about the future connection to adjoining property. That, of course, would be the Warrington Property or this project, Overfall Preserve. Moving to the right, the 2 circles or ovals that you see on the far right-hand side describe themselves as a 24-foot existing connection to adjoining parcel. And then if you move to the one on the bottom center, that talks about a 24-foot cross-access and utility easement. Again, these are the record plans that were reviewed and approved by the city regarding the interconnectivity between these various parcels. If we look at page 19 on the list of slides, this is the record plan for the Lodge at Historic Lewis that's recorded in plot book 419, page 96. And if you go to the second page, what's highlighted there, and again, it's too small to read, but that says it's the future interconnection to the adjoining parcel. And as you know, those interconnections actually exist now. They are not in the future. They presently exist. During the Planning Commission process, there was a great deal of discussion about this interconnection and the access to Kings Highway and Savannah Road. And the developer of both the Lodge at Historic Lewis and Dutchman's Harvest, as you know, was the same developer. And he submitted a letter dated January 17th, 2025, which states as follows. He began by stating that he was writing to, and I'm going to quote, provide clarity on the position of Dutchman's Harvest and the Lodge at Historic Lewis on the proposed Overfall Preserve development. In the next paragraph, that letter states as follows. We have no objection to the proposed plans of Overfall Preserve and have always anticipated sharing an entrance with whatever development took place on the Warrington property. In fact, sharing that entrance with the Warrington property was a condition of the extinguishment of a first right of refusal held on the Newsham lot that we purchased and made part of the Dutchman's Harvest project. In the next paragraph, Mr. Shell states, we also do not object to the future residents of Overfalls Preserve utilizing the interior roads of Dutchman's Harvest and the Lodge at Historic Lewis to access the future roundabout. Then he puts parenthetically, or traffic light, ... changes every year at our entrance to Kings Highway. When we agreed to share the entrance and the cost associated with the construction of the entrance to Savannah Road, we also agreed to cross-access easements for the use of those living at whatever future development took place at Overfalls Preserve. Again, that simply put, what is requested as part of condition 21 already exists. So there'd be a condition to accomplish something that already exists and is unnecessary, as what you have seen with respect to the site plan for Overfall Preserve is consistent with what was always intended and planned for these properties. If we can go back to page 13, which is back to the list, and specifically condition 22, and condition 22 starts on this page and actually goes to the next page because of all the various subparts and subparts to the subparts that exist in condition 22. Essentially what this condition does is it seeks to impose a traffic operations study, or TOS, requirement on the developer. At a very high level, I would note that in the first instance, the term traffic operations study is not something that typically exists in the traffic review and analysis realm. People are familiar with, in the traffic industry, traffic impact studies, or TIS, and traffic operations analysis, TOAs. Those are the tools that are frequently used by DELDOT and municipalities as they consider traffic impacts from future development. Those are the tools that are referenced by DELDOT in its Development Coordination Manual, which is developed through the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual. For all of those tools, there are basic requirements, thresholds that are measured in average daily trips when each of those tools is going to be used. As I mentioned during the very initial comments, because this is a 90-unit townhome project, there's a specific type of traffic that gets assigned to it, and the ITE manual indicates the trip generation that would occur from that use. When those numbers are used, and based upon the DELDOT Development Coordination Manual, this amount of traffic does not meet the warrants for a traffic impact study, which is why DELDOT recommended the area-wide study fee approach. And again, as I mentioned, there's both the memorandum and then the minutes from the pre-development meeting within the project materials. And this is why the applicant has requested in the applicant's response that you see on the screen that condition 22 be replaced with the language that you see, which essentially requires the developer to do whatever is required by DELDOT. As council knows, should this application receive favorable preliminary site plan approval from the mayor and council, that's certainly not the end of the process. And in fact, in many ways, it just begins the process, as its name indicates. It is a preliminary approval. And what occurs after that point is review of this and a final detailed review of this by various state agencies, including the State Fire Marshal's Office, the Sussex Conservation Districts, to make sure that all the HydroCAD requirements and such that Mr. Crouch and his team will put together, that the project will meet all the various stormwater regulations. And specific to condition 22, this project will have to go through DELDOT's review process to receive no objection letters and then ultimately entrance approvals for this community. And so that is why what's proposed is language that requires approval with this in accordance with DELDOT's Development Coordination Manual. One of the best indications to me that a traffic operations study is not a recognized traffic planning tool, and it is a term mentioned in your code. So your code does refer to a traffic operations study. But the fact that it's not a recognized planning tool, I think, is best demonstrated by the fact that the requirements for this condition don't fit on that page, and they go significantly into the next page because there's not a standard that is accepted and or recognized by traffic engineers. What the Planning Commission did was it attempted to create that standard within this condition. And so what you see is a list of items created by the Planning Commission to address the lack of information and standards about a traffic operations study. I would suggest to the mayor and council that rather than involving itself in arbitrary requirements of a homemade traffic test, the city should rely upon DELDOT standards, the Development Coordination Manual, as well as the ITE Manual, so that there are objective standards that can be applied to this, as has already started to occur through the pre-application meeting that you have the minutes of. And that, again, that is the request for number 22. And in a moment, I'm going to ask the traffic engineer to join me. But before she does, if we can move to the next page, which is the continuation of condition 22, and then condition 23. Condition 23 is sort of a mixed bag of traffic-related items as well as a parking item is mixed in. And the applicant, as you can see, proposes that condition 23 be deleted. The first item that's in 23, the first sentence talks about safety recommendations in the traffic operations study and their construction or funding by the applicant. And I would suggest that the language that's proposed for 22 would take care of that, because it would be by the DELDOT standard, and it does require that the applicant construct whatever DELDOT would require as part of the typical review of a residential project or community like this. The next part of condition 23 talks about the construction of dual exit lanes on Dutchman's Avenue, and I will talk about that in a moment with the traffic engineer. And then the last item that's there is to consider reducing the width of driveways with single car garages to allow for more on-street parking. And the reason why this is lumped in with the items that are requested for deletion is because it would have the opposite effect of what I believe the Planning Commission intended if you were to reduce the width of the driveways with single car garages. And that's because if there's not another driveway location for those cars, even if there's not a garage that's in front of it, at least it provides another off-street parking place for the resident or occupant of that unit. If there's not another one there, it just naturally means the person's going to park on the street. And so this would actually provide or almost require more people to park on the street, which I don't think was the intention of what the Planning Commission was intending to do there. And so the goal, I believe, was to provide more off-street parking, but I think that, again, the applicant thinks this actually places more cars on the street parking because there's just less in-driveway parking that would be available for those various units. At this time, I'm going to ask Ms. Ridgey, the traffic engineer, if she would join me here. And if you could begin by introducing yourself to the council.
Good evening. Hello, my name is Dawn Ridgey, and I am a senior traffic engineer with Davis Bowen and Friedel. And I've had my professional engineering license for almost 25 years, and my concentration is in transportation.
And have you been involved with the planning, the review, and study of the traffic and entrances, or entrance rather, for Overfall Preserve?
Yes, I have.
Just for the benefit of the, and actually, if we could go to slide 21. And to help filibuster, it's already there. Did you help to prepare this slide for the mayor and council?
Yes, I did.
If you could describe what is the average daily trips for Overfall Preserve, and how is that reflected on the information that anyone can see?
The average daily traffic for Overfall Preserve is 635 vehicles per day. And you can see from the two diagrams on the left that I broke out the individual traffic from Overfall Preserve, and I also created a diagram which shows all traffic that includes the lodge at Historic Lewis and also Dutchman's Harvest. So the diagram to the right has all traffic from the three developments, and then the one to the left is Overfall Preserve broken out separately.
And I believe it's shown on the exhibit, but as percentage at full build-out, how much traffic is Overfall Preserve projected to add? And if you could do that by both, I guess, an east and west direction.
Sure. So to the east, heading towards the beach would be an increase of 1% over the day. And to the west, to and from 5 Points would be 4%.
And I've stated several times here this evening that the Overfall Preserve / Warrington Property traffic was always anticipated to enter onto Savannah Road from Dutchman's Avenue. Have you seen that in the documents that you've looked at in your capacity looking at the traffic for Overfall Preserve?
Yes.
When you take into account Dutchman's Harvest, Overfall Preserved as it's proposed, and then the lodge at Historic Lewis, is there a dedicated left turn lane there present that's planned?
On Dutchman's?
Correct.
No.
And do you know why there's not one there?
Honestly, it's not warranted, but typically DelDOT looks mainly at the entering traffic to make sure that there is appropriate left turn lanes and right turn lanes where needed. So I was involved with that and help with the design criteria for the entrance. So with that, I had done some analysis which actually showed that the existing one lane exiting from Dutchman's Avenue actually only has one vehicle stacking, and when you look at it with two exiting lanes, it only improves by 1/10. So basically, to be technical, if you could see up there, it's 0.9 vehicles with one exiting lane, and if you add a second, you have 0.8 vehicles in the left lane and 0.1 in the right lane, so virtually no improvement for stacking.
The Planning Commission indicated in its proposed condition that adding a left turn lane is a safety issue. When you look at what the analysis we just provided, is there a safety issue or concern that stands out with respect to that change that you just showed, 0.9 and 0.8?
With regard to adding lanes at an entrance that's exiting onto a roadway, excuse me for a second. It's typically you add lanes for capacity. So it's really not about safety, it's really more about capacity and adding lanes. So if, for instance, this was a larger development, then there would be more issues with vehicle stacking and capacity related issues, then you would add another lane.
And your analysis shows that there's not a capacity issue here at this intersection of Dutchman's Avenue and Savannah Road.
No.
And the numbers that are shown on the screen, are those what I think people call a worst case scenario? And if yes, how are they factored into the worst case scenario?
So if, as I mentioned, looking at the traffic diagram to the left with just Overfall Preserve, you could see that the percentages add up to 100% at the Savannah Road access. So what was assumed was a worst case scenario that all traffic would be using the Savannah Road access. And while there would be, because of the interconnection, there are vehicles that will be expected to use Kings Highway once it's fully connected. This particular, what I've presented, is the worst case scenario.
So you assume that there would be no cars that went to Kings Highway. Everybody used Savannah Road.
Correct.
I interrupted you, go.
No, it's fine. No, and I was just going to say too that as far as traffic numbers in a worst case scenario, I believe that this is a worst case scenario in the fact that you can expect a portion of residents to use the easily accessible trail and pedestrian facilities that are available adjacent to the development. And so that would reduce trips because people would use walking or biking, ideally, a larger portion. But yeah, so certainly a portion would be utilized in those. And then also, based on my understanding, this is supposed to be a similar community to Lewis Waterfront Preserve. And based on the demographics there, that there would be a large portion that's expected to be second homes. So with that, that would also be a reduction in traffic on an average basis.
But for your analysis that you just presented, you assume that nobody walks or bikes, everybody's a full-time resident, occupies it, and everybody uses Savannah's road.
Yes,
Savannah Road.
yes.
One other item that is not listed in the bullet points, but if you add a new lane or stopping condition, does that alter Savannah Road in any way, or would there be any requirements to modify Savannah Road as part of
Upon adding Overfall Preserve?
upon adding a lane, if you
Oh,
were to add
adding a lane. No, well, oh, yes, actually, I know, okay, so if we were to add a lane, then that would require the left turn lane that's existing, right now it's just constructed and was turned into Dutchman's Avenue, would actually be shortened. Because by adding a second lane, then you would actually have to shift over your storage it would actually condense the storage for the left turn lane into Dutchman's Avenue. And there's also the constraint too of the pedestrian crossing, the trail crossing, that's just to the east. So there's really only so much you can do in there.
And is there any room to the east to extend that available capacity or storage area?
No.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Can I ask a quick question, just for clarity? The diagram says Del Dot approved traffic generation diagram. Obviously, Del Dot didn't approve this.
No, they did.
They approved this diagram?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's part of the pre-submittal meeting process. It's very early on.
Okay,
The traffic engineer would put together this particular diagram, and you would show the traffic on the road that it would be accessing, so like Savannah Road. So you would show that. And then also on the right-hand side, you see there's trip generation for not only the Overfall Preserve project, but then also you can see the multifamily and the continuing care facility. Those are the lodge at Lewis.
okay.
And also Dutchman's Harvest. So on the right-hand side, that site traffic data is all traffic that will be using this particular
Okay.
access.
So was this document ever shared with our planning commission?
The traffic generation diagram,
This right here?
it was on the plans.
It was on the plan? Okay.
And since I have you here, the various classifications on the right-hand diagram, are those the categories from the ITE manual?
Yes.
And so each of those is a specific category in the ITE manual that people use based on the number of units to identify how many trips each would generate.
Yes.
And I said it earlier, but I'd like to have the traffic engineer read. Are you familiar with what is being referred to as the TOS that the city has proposed here as far as a traffic operations study? Is that a study that you're familiar with?
No.
Had you heard of it before looking and finding that term in the City of Lewis Code?
No.
Excuse me, may I ask a question before you sit down, please? You mentioned that there would be a reduction in the storage capacity of the turn lanes?
If we were to add an exiting lane,
Correct.
another exiting lane,
I
yes.
understood that to be, yes.
Mhm.
Can you quantify that by reduction of storage? How impactful would that be? We typically think of units of cars when we're talking about this kind of storage. How many cars are we not being able to store?
I would say one probably, and it's already been shortened. This particular left turn lane was already shortened due to the the trail crossing just to the east. So DelDOT approved a design deviation, which made the left turn lane shorter. Now it still accommodates, right now it accommodates the necessary storage. So that is why everything is working out well with all three developments using this access.
Right, but those developments are, the only one that has been completed, of course, is the lodge at this point in time. The other two, well, one hasn't been started, and the other one is under development at this time, so we don't really have a good test of the impact there, do we? You know, there's no demand per se.
No, but when we do the auxiliary lane worksheet, which is what is put together to determine the criteria for the lanes that come in to roads that access state maintained highways, there's certain ranges. So basically, you know, you can have, you enter in your data of the number of left turns in per hour, and then there's like a range of what is allowable. So that's why really the Dutchman's Harvest project, they built this entrance, and then the Overfall Preserve really doesn't generate that much traffic in the big scheme of things, so it is able to also be accommodated. So everything should work out as far as proper storage the way it is now. And the exiting lane, the additional exiting lane, in my opinion, is not needed based on the analysis that I've done. And you know, as like I said, as the impact to Savannah Road would be that left turn lane that was just constructed would just be shorter. Because of adding the lane, it would just push it in. So, like I said, that it would be basically shrunk a little bit.
Right.
So, like I say, about a car.
By one car,
Mm-hmm.
right, thank you.
You're welcome.
We can go to page
Sure.
13. Actually, I'm sorry, 14. Go to the next page after that. Perfect. The last two conditions from the Planning Commission's recommendation are on the screen. Condition 24, again, it relates to the same Dutchman's Avenue and the dedicated left turn lane. You just heard from the traffic engineer, which is why what's proposed is that condition be deleted. Condition 25, moving to the last recommended condition, requires a 15-foot usable rear yard for all units that is level and free of vegetation. The applicant requests that this be deleted as it's not found in the city's code, and it's the type of arbitrary requirement that has not been imposed on other developments and is not enforceable under the law. That reviews all of the Planning Commission's recommendation, beginning with the waiver request and going through the 25 conditions. Myself and the traffic engineer and the civil engineer are certainly available to answer whatever questions that council may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hutt. That was very comprehensive. Do we have any questions?
I do. I have several questions, and thank you,
Great.
Mr. Hutt. I always like your this saves so much time, so thank
Yeah.
you. And it really is a helpful tool. I've got a few little questions, but I really want to focus in on with the traffic engineer, and I apologize, I don't remember your name.
Her name is Dawn Ridgey.
Dawn Ridgey, okay.
Yeah, I did write that down.
Okay, so Ms. Ridgey, I have a series of grouping of questions, somewhat related to they're all related to the conditions, but the first is, real-life experience on Savannah Road is not a smooth experience. Okay, right now, without any of these developments having any capacity or any load onto Savannah, we have backups on Savannah for a variety of reasons. So that's the truth of what we experience here in Lewis, and I'm sure you're seeing all the public comments. If there's one comment that most people made, it was very much worried about traffic and an increase in traffic. So first of all, thank you for your diagram. I'm ex officio to Planning Commission. I'll be honest, I don't think I ever saw that. I just think for future activities as well, That's a very useful tool to be part of a site plan, and that's something that I think we should recommend to our city planner, that we actually encourage all applicants to have, because I think the planning commission could have benefited from that exchange with you all. So my question is, we've got a busy road. We have a road that is used as an evacuation route. We have a road that is viewed as one of the key entrances to our hospital. So it's got emergency vehicles going up and down all of the time. Traffic calming may be part of what the Planning Commission is trying to say, which is, how are you going to be helpful? So my question is, first of all, the Department of Transportation's nationwide look at intersection ratings. Okay, so when you get to look at whether a circle might be a better answer, a roundabout, or a stoplight, even though that adds to queuing. When you look at, as a traffic engineer, these developments coming onto a fairly busy road already, do you think that T intersection coming onto Savannah is a potentially future failed intersection? Because we at council have to look at not just today, but what is coming forward. So that's my first question.
Well, actually, I think it helps that it is a T intersection, because you don't have the opposing traffic from the other side of the street, which complicates things, as everyone knows. It's
Right.
easier to make a left or a right from a T intersection than it is from a four-way. But as far as the level of service, I have done some preliminary analysis, which led to my results with the vehicle stacking. And what I've done is I've looked at 10 years in the future. So based on the volumes of traffic that DelDOT has on their website, I was able to use those numbers and come up with some level of service. In the future, in the morning, I come up with level of service C. And in the future, in the evening, I come up with a level of service D.
A level D.
What is level?
Gay, can you explain that?
Explain what
Levels,
level
yeah.
C
So
means.
a level of service, a level of
That's why I asked
service
the question.
C, let's see, is, I believe, 25 seconds. It's 15, I believe 15 to 25 seconds
Mhm.
of average delay for the approaching vehicle. So the level of service D, I believe, is 25 to 35. Please don't quote me on that. I need to actually look that up just to verify.
But in other words, I appreciate that the rating is how long do you have to wait? That's the,
Right,
that's
and
the,
the average approaching vehicle,
right.
how long would you have to wait?
And so when do you get in, as a traffic engineer, when you get to E or F, I don't know if there's a G, but I know there's an E and an F, that's when you start to say, we got to figure out something else, right? And that's really where roundabouts often come in. So you're saying would be currently a C and D?
No, 10
You're
years
saying
into the
10
future.
years from now,
Mhm.
you would see that this would be it's not great, but it's not yet to the E or F when you would have to go in and restructure something,
Right.
right? Okay.
And with it, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
And does that projection, that grading, does that take into consideration the seasonality of this community, where we have big swings with the number of people who use that corridor? I'll say, well, it feels like year-round now, really, but historically, I'll say from May through October.
So what my analysis will reflect is an average weekday morning and evening peak hour. So if you remember, I mentioned the morning would be level of service C, the evening would be level of service D.
Right?
So that is a typical weekday.
Weekday.
A weekday. And
Monday.
Councilman Richard's point is an interesting one in terms of whether DelDOT for the coastal towns
Right.
factors in an up to 5 times population increase for us over a 3-month period. And so is that calculated in their manuals? Or is that a sensitive factor that they put in?
It actually is. It's called a seasonal factor.
Okay.
So they would look at what, like for instance, if you did traffic counts in January, you'd want to factor way up. If you do traffic counts in June, you would factor down. So it's kind of, you want to achieve that average,
Mhm.
not just the worst case all year, all season, but an average over the entire year.
One of the other concerns at the Planning Commission conversations were not just a typical intersection, but you have elderly, maybe disabled at the lodge. You have more children perhaps in the affordable housing partnership. So we have this unique dynamic, which we're very pleased to have that diversity. But how does that get factored into your analysis, that this is not just a road, this is a road that we know has perhaps an increased number of children or those that might have some impairment in terms of crossing?
Well, you could look at pedestrian activity, and you could factor that in as well. I have to be honest, I did not look at the pedestrian activity. Typically, that doesn't have a big impact unless you're talking about a signal, which you would have pedestrian crossing buttons, and then that actually ties all into the signal timing. So for unsignalized intersection analysis, it really doesn't come into play.
Okay. Okay, I have a few more questions on.
And you assumed no pedestrian activity.
You assumed.
That's true.
Okay, I have a few more questions on traffic, and then I'll let my colleagues ask some questions too. When you talked about the fact that you'll follow, of course, you'll follow the DelDOT rules as a traffic engineer, that's your governing body really. Some of the things that might perhaps help this, I'm going to call it a choke point. We have a lot of issues right in the on Dutchman Avenue of what else happens in that area. We have a bike path, we have pedestrians, we have motorists, we have commercial, just as Mr. Huff described. So if, for example, council asked you to work with DelDOT to add an additional speed sign before, it might even be outside the city limits, but basically you are the gateway. This road is the gateway from this section coming into Lewis. And I think what the public's saying is, we're very worried about the speed that people come through. We're worried about the traffic congestion. There may be some traffic calming things that we would like to hear about that you could be proposing that would slow the traffic, calm the traffic, so that we could have a higher level of safety. I think the Planning Commission is very appropriately very worried about safety. So that's one that I just want to have a conversation about. How will, well, let me say it a little bit differently. Alex, how will we see that? In other words, this is the part of the process that, I'll say it to the public, makes no sense to me. In other words, these folks are coming in with a lot of detail. We are expressing safety concerns. We may or may not approve. They go out and meet with the state. How do we get another bite at this apple to hear this, so the public, our job as stewards of the public, we don't know what happens in this next round.
Right, so this is the opportunity to develop the record and gain evidence. So this is your bite at the apple, you could
This is
say.
my bite of the apple.
And not my words, coming from DelDOT, for a traffic operations study, the state and the local municipality may have different interests. And just because DelDOT's satisfied, there may be interests the municipality has that need to be addressed.
Okay.
And be a reason for it.
Okay, so this is gonna be my big bite of that apple, and I know that you're good stewards, you're a developer caring about being in Lewis, is that you pay particular attention, and there's so many wonderful traffic calming techniques, as you know, as a traffic engineer. Whether that's a speed pillow, I'm not talking about a bump that hurts the chassis of the bottom of a car, but the softer pillows, the signage outside, the flashing lights. The other one that I would say that you could really help the city on is that crosswalk that's near your entrance exit is one that is, we have a lot of poor behavior on, okay? We have cyclists that don't dismount, so we have cars that stop because the cyclists don't look like pedestrians at that point, so nobody knows really who has the right of way. So the nice thing is that motorists slow down or stop, which adds to the queue. A pedestrian, no question, we're all supposed to stop. So we've got some things that you might recommend that we do, or DelDOT does, related to that intersection, which would help the businesses and also your development. But my point is, I would like to see reasonable traffic calming conversations that you have, that the applicant would pay for, so that we can have a higher confidence level in the safety of this development. That's really my main purpose, because we have a choke point. My last question on traffic is, the Planning Commission continues, and maybe we did use they used the wrong terminology, or maybe our code needs to change. I think that's the good recommendation from you all. There's a lot of confusion about how does DelDOT factor in the total. So what's unclear is you do an analysis related to one development. I've heard Mr. Huff say one development shouldn't pay the burden related to extensive traffic. But I think the public's really wondering, who adds it all up? In other words, you've got all the developments coming in Lewis, and we have developments right outside of our city limits that are significant. And then as Councilman Richard said, we've also got seasonal traffic. How is that calculated? How does DelDOT calculate, as you did, the 10-year related to the total impact of all these developments? Not one at a time. One at a time can probably survive almost every litmus test, but the combination is what's concerning, I know, the Council, the Planning Commission, and our public.
So it's interesting you should say that, because I think that one thing that's demonstrated today with the Overfall Preserve project is that they qualify for an area-wide study fee. And technically, when the developer pays that money to DelDOT, then they are putting it in a pot to do a study. And so if the city of Lewis were to ask DelDOT to utilize that money to study the addition of this project and Dutchman's Harvest and the Lodge, if they were to, or whatever other projects are coming along, then that would be my thought, would be to request DelDOT study that with the money that the developers have given them. So that is an area-wide study fee.
Okay.
The idea of it is that they take that money and then they would study the area. Because a lot of times, like, I know over the years, you study 5 points, you study 5 points, you study 5 points, you put over and over and over.
Right.
And it's
Exactly.
like, you know,
And nothing else gets done.
And nothing else.
it just keeps, okay, so, you know, how many times are you gonna study
Yeah.
the same intersection?
Right.
So basically, you know, the idea is to take that money and put it into an area-wide study fee pot, and then basically have DelDOT study. So I to be fair, I need to say that I personally haven't seen DelDOT execute that specifically as you're asking.
Mhm.
But-
But we have the authority and right to request that.
I would think so.
Yep.
That's, like I say, that's what the money is going into the area-wide study fee
Okay.
pot for. So
Okay.
I'm thinking that DelDOT would be the one that would be, you know, let's do an area-wide study fee. The city of
And
Lewis
so,
is
let me ask a
keeping area-wide
clarification
study.
from your council and ours. So let's say that is one of the recommendations that we, mayor and city council, would put, and I know personally that would be high on my list. How does that align with the development's timetable, the applicant's timetable? So, you know, that study, I don't know how quick DelDOT's would be on moving that through. So how does that work, that even if we gave approval, let's say, but we said, but it has to be in alignment with the results of that, how does that work?
So it depends in part on DelDOT's timeline, which would probably not be very quick. This is preliminary approval at this point.
Mhm.
There would still be an opportunity for final approval over several months. I know you've seen some applications come through that are taking longer to get their state approvals.
Okay.
So there might be a need for an extension.
Mhm.
So it's hard to predict exactly how long that would take.
But we could put that kind of requirement in to say it would be aligned with that
Yeah.
area-wide
Mhm.
study. We could
Yeah,
make
as a
that,
condition.
which addresses a lot of those other conditions, the planning commission. What about from the applicant's perspective? Does that,
It is unclear to me how you have a condition for the applicant to fulfill that DelDOT has to fulfill.
yeah, I know exactly.
And that's the problem
Yeah.
with that condition, is you've just made a condition that is something that is well outside of the applicant's control.
Right.
Whereas if it's a condition, for instance, go get, you know, like any other agency, the Sussex Conservation District, that's within the applicant's control. There's a process, we submit a plan, they review it, and then it gets presented to the planning department for its, you know, final approval and blessing. Saying that some third-party agency has to do some other study, that is something that's not within the applicant's control, and something that is gonna lead to frankly, this application probably not being able to move forward because we're just waiting on DelDOT, and we all know what
That might take
comes
some
from
time.
that
Right.
process.
Okay.
Two things I wanted to address. One is, there was a question about seasonal traffic,
Right.
Mhm.
and I don't know the exact range, and Ms. Ritchie probably does, but there was a question about beach towns. If you're doing a traffic impact study near a beach town or coastal area, you have to study the traffic and monitor and take your counts during the summer, is that correct?
You do, for a weekend, typically the weekday, DelDOT still wants to see traffic counts done while school's in session. So,
But for the weekend, which would be the worst traffic,
mhm.
for beach towns, the
Mhm.
comfort to the town is that is counted on they require counts that are done during the busiest times of the year, on the busiest days of the year,
And school must be closed
and school.
for those.
Do you have any idea how, with the frequency that DelDOT does do the traffic counting?
Well, that's a really open-ended question. There is road tubes that they put out in various locations, and those get traffic counts on a daily, yearly basis. So
Mhm.
basically the time, there's particular locations all over the state, and they put their tubes out and collect data all the time. As far as individual counts that you would get, say, in an intersection during an hour where they would classify everybody who's turning, whatever direction they're turning. They classify vehicle types. They'd also include pedestrians. They would also include various things that need to be included for signals. So there's all different things that they would do, but as far as how often they get those, typically I feel like it's when there's a need. So if as far as intersections go, but along our roadways, then there's traffic data being collected all the time.
And do we know how current or recent the traffic count was for Savannah Road at the time that this plan was developed and approved?
So, the traffic count data that I have is basically what I just described. It's the traffic data collected by DelDOT on Savannah Road.
Yep.
And it's the through volumes on Savannah Road. So then there's factors up there in the table. Your 10-year projected roadway ADT, and then you have some other factors down there, a K factor and a D factor, and you would figure out what your peak hour of the day is based on those factors, based on the road type.
Mhm.
So that is where I got my information from, and it is from the 2023 traffic data summary. So when I talk about 10 years into the future, we apply a factor that DelDOT requires, and that puts us 10 years into the future based on those numbers.
Can you point out, I believe everything you're saying, but where do you see the date on that chart?
The date,
Yeah, you mentioned that it was done in '23. Am I overlooking it?
it's in the top left of the right hand, so the right hand table.
Whoops.
Okay, so if you
Yeah.
look there, you'll see
Oh,
functional
yes.
class.
I see it
Yes.
now. Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Deputy Mayor, I have a few other questions, but not related to traffic.
Sure.
You're fine? Okay.
Actually, I'd like to add one more thing.
Please.
So just to put it in perspective, that the traffic that's expected, at least from an exiting perspective on Dutchman's Avenue, it's projected to be an average of one vehicle approaching Savannah Road every 2 minutes in the morning peak hour, and one vehicle every 3 minutes in the evening peak hour. So if you can think about it, it's an average
Mhm.
over the hour, but the idea is you'd have one vehicle approaching from Overfall Preserve every 2 minutes.
And your peak hours are what time in the morning and what time in the evening?
Well, generally they're
Generally.
between 7 and 9
Okay,
and 4 and 6.
okay.
So I just wanted to put that in perspective.
that's helpful.
Just to kind of
Yeah.
see like what kind of traffic impact Overfall Preserve's have.
Sure.
Right, yeah.
Appreciate it.
exactly.
Thank you.
I I'm sorry, I had one more question for Ms. Ridgey, since we talked about level of service.
Yeah. She can't leave.
There's a chair right there with a microphone.
Exactly.
What level of service does DelDOT plan to for intersections? As far as what's the acceptable level of service at an intersection?
D,
You're
I
right.
assume. Yeah, D, right. That always surprised me when I did some other traffic work in another state, that D was acceptable. I thought that was never a good number, but
that's
it
because
is.
it's not.
I know,
It's
I
not
know.
based on like
No,
school grades.
I know. It's not, yeah, the grade on a curve, it's a bell curve. So condition number 4, just for clarification, when you say the streetlights shall comply with the requirements of BPW, actually, we lay out the requirements. We're the customer of BPW, so we are the ones. I just want that clarified for the record. It's the city of Lewis,
Right.
and then BPW delivers, but to our requirements. Because we're the ones who say dark sky lighting, or we say the height, it's ours. So just for clarification, in your response on number 4.
Sure, and that, the applicant's response could certainly be modified, but I would say that whatever that requirement is, it should be uniform throughout the city and not apply to Overfall.
Oh, no, it
Preserve.
is. It's
Right.
uniform. Yeah,
Right.
it is. It's always our requirement. We're the customer of BPW. In terms of number 17, I just want to clarify, I think the planning commission fully understood that this was not in the historic district. What they were trying to speak to was the comp plan, about the feel and the look of Lewis. And so I think your answer is fine. I just wanted to clarify that the planning commission recognized this is not in the historic district, but they're wanting the developments, all developments, to start to reflect a little bit more of the character of the architectural designs, of which there are many, many choices. And I just want to clarify that that was the intent, which I think you have responded to. Okay. Let's see, already exists. Oh, a question, and maybe Alex, this is for you. In condition 21, the applicant says the condition can be deleted because the agreement already exists. Fair enough, good statement. But forever? Like, what happens with ownership change? I mean, I understand the applicant's response, but I would be concerned about the future. What if somebody else owns the lodge and the development and says, oh, well, I don't know what they were thinking. How does that work?
They'd have to come back to the city.
They'd have to come back to the city, right? So we're not worried on that?
May I piggyback on your
You can
question?
look, I'll say, go ahead.
May I piggyback on
Yes,
you
please.
first? Mr. Hutt, when you spoke to this, you described the agreement that exists. You didn't describe that as an easement, as a legal document, as a legal right-of-way. And if there is such a document, do you have a deed book that was recorded that would provide the right-of-way for the adjacent parcel that is Overfall Preserve, those residents to actually enter onto private property and cross?
It's shown on the site plans that we showed on the screen for the Lodge at Historic Lewis and Overfall Preserve.
Right, but I didn't see a deed book reference or page number to that.
Those are plot books and pages that are recorded.
But is that an easement that's recorded or just the plan?
It says 24, if it says 24-foot cross-access and utility easement, there's an easement.
And the parties to that easement are whom, please?
The parties to that easement are anyone who's, the city required that interconnectivity.
But the city is not party to that agreement, is that correct?
Well, they don't need to be because you're the city. You have special powers that average, just two adjacent property owners don't have. So when a property owner comes in and says, this is the site plan that I'm putting forward, and then the city reviews it, and then that gets recorded, and it says there's a 24-foot cross-access and utility easement, that's a cross-access and utility easement that exists at that point. And it's not just, frankly, as we know, and I'm sure we're going to hear some of this in a few minutes here, that cross-access and utility easement doesn't just apply to the folks who are living in the Lodge at Historic Lewis and Dutchman's Harvest. When that road is fully opened, people will be able to get from Savannah Road to Kings Highway.
But that's not what the express intention was for that interconnectivity at the time that approval was given to the lodge and to Dutchman's Harvest. That's not what was the expectation of council, that it was gonna be a fully public route through that parking lot.
But that's what the conditions required. I mean, actually, condition 4 that we read, that's exactly what it required.
Okay, we'll take it up at another time, thank you.
2 more comments. On condition 25 from the Planning Commission, the minimum 15-foot usable rear yard for units, the applicant saying delete this condition. I just want to know a little bit more about that, because there was a significant amount of conversation at the LPC, really caring for the individuals who would be buying, that they needed some place to have their backyard, their, kids to enjoy. And this was their way to tell you that. But when you say just delete the condition, you're saying because it's not in our code?
Correct. Your code has very specific open space requirements.
Yes,
Right,
We exceed them, we double them
Absolutely.
everywhere.
yeah,
That's the requirement that is enforceable. Anything else, you're just making up rules as you go
Yeah.
along. The law doesn't allow that to occur. If there's open space requirements, and we went through them, and Mr. Crouch's office put together the exhibit to show that it was very careful to make sure that we met all the requirements that were within the code on that, and not just barely meeting them, but
You exceed them.
doubling.
yeah, exactly.
And so to say on top of that now that you have to have a level area of 15 feet behind, that's not found in the
In
code.
code. It seems, and I've said this before with you, that the spirit and the code, we keep coming back at writing the open space to try to express the intent and spirit. And I think, so I understand what you're saying in code compliance, and maybe we have to go back to the open space code again for other things. But the Planning Commission was trying to look at the folks that would buy these properties to have a little bit of a backyard that was theirs for a table and chairs, that wasn't everything open to everybody else.
But I'd also say, bear in mind that everyone who comes to buy a property is going to be fully cognizant of what they're buying.
True, no,
So,
absolutely, no, absolutely. And then I have a question which is maybe more for Alex. You opened it with your comment about the mix, that it was the mix of all those different types of townhouse, single family. And so my question, Alex, for you is, some of the Planning Commission felt it meant a mix, meaning you had to mix it up and have those varieties. And then the applicant and others said, it just says, here's your menu, pick and choose. And so I'm not saying that the applicant is not being responsive to code. I'm just saying I don't think that was the Planning Commission's intent when they wrote that part of the code. They wanted to see a variety. And so that's just something that we have to look at with the city,
Absolutely.
right?
And
Okay.
so a condition could be clarified to increase the enforceability of it. And just in general to conditions, I just want to point out that the code requirements are generally the minimum requirements.
Right.
If you have a health, safety, welfare purpose, you can't go beyond what the code requires.
Okay,
Exactly.
okay.
Thank you.
And so my last comment is, thank you on the trees. We appreciate that you're listening to the intent of the city, and to have the additional trees is really a commitment that you've made, and we really appreciate that part. Deputy Mayor, those are the end of my comments.
Anything else, Jim?
No, I'm good.
Good,
Thank
okay.
you.
So I think, thank you, Mr. Hutt. I think that takes us now to the public comment portion of this hearing. I think moving forward, we will limit comments to 3 minutes. If your comment exceeds that, there'll be probably an opportunity to submit comments to the city, written comments, later. So with that said, the floor is open for public comment. Doug?
Good evening and thank you. These comments are notes from the Historic Lewis Byway. And as we know, the proposed Overfall Preserve development is located a few feet off of Savannah Road. It's a state designated scenic byway with its entrance on Savannah Road. The Historic Lewis Byway supports the conditions of approval proposed by the Lewis Planning Commission, along with the following additions. Under viewshed preservation, LPC, condition number 5, the corridor buffer along Savannah Road shall match the design and planning at Dutchman's Harvest Development. Require development to work with the Lewis Historic Byway on all landscape plans and signage visible from Savannah Road to preserve the viewshed on the scenic byway. The Historic Lewis Byway strongly supports condition number 17 that the architectural character should be complementary and complement the character of Lewis, and all signage should also complement the city. Under LPC condition number 15, if permitted by the City of Lewis, the Board of Public Works, the applicant shall construct an opaque 6-foot tall fence at the community property line for units 1 through 12. If a fence is approved, we would ask that you require that a landscape buffer be required, shielding the view of that fence from Savannah Road. I know we had quite a bit of discussion about the traffic, but in spite of some of the comments, we would like to see added to the traffic study, whether that's a TOS or a TIS or condition 22, the following language should be included. It should include school traffic and hospital traffic in the study, especially at peak hours. Evaluate emergency access to the 2 public schools and BB Hospital on Savannah Road. Does the increase in traffic numbers from Overfall Preserve, combined with the under construction currently of Dutchman Harvest at the recently built retirement home, the Lodge, does it create additional congestion, making it difficult for police, fire, ambulance, emergency vehicles to access these institutions at various times of day, particularly during the peak AM and PM hours, as well as Saturday? Note that all 3 of these developments will be using the combined entrance on Savannah Road. We'd like to ask DelDOT to propose solutions. We talked about it. Amy Maresco mentioned the choke point. Would a traffic light cure the choke point? We're looking for solutions. Additionally, we'd like to add a condition that DelDOT address safety of the recently reconstructed pedestrian crossing near the entrance to the Overfall Preserve. The earlier configuration was much safer than the new alignment that was done recently. Yeah, because add in the combination of the turning lanes, whether there's a light or not, you've got just an awful lot coming together at one point right there, and safety should be number 1. This one condition that I have has been remodeled by the conversation that just occurred about a right-of-way through the lodge and through Dutchman's. So wherever that argument lands, I don't know, but it doesn't seem like, and I heard that there were signs saying that they did not want people driving through the lodge. They have signs up saying, do not enter. Do we make them take the signs down? And lastly, I think you need to stop and picture. I know we've talked about 1 car or 3 cars at a time coming out, but it's 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, and schools are still in session, and BB Hospital's getting out, or maybe it's 3:30 or 4. I don't know exactly when, and you can't get across Savannah Road from that turn point. And I think it's critical that a choke point solution be found, because with bicycles, it's going to be tough to keep our pedestrians safe without a solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Spellman, I have a question. Will you be submitting your statement, your written, to our city clerk for the record?
I certainly will.
Appreciate that.
Not today. We'll
Yeah,
polish these remarks and
yeah.
they'll
Thank
be
you.
on
That
our
would be
letterhead.
helpful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, who's this?
Good evening. I'm Jeff Plummer, representing the Plummer Properties. On 828 Kings Highway, that is where the road hub is. They're considering putting a road hub through there. My point is, when the Warrington property is developed, or if it does get developed, plans should have been looked at ahead of time on traffic before thinking about going through someone else's property. We are not selling the property. We're not allowing a road to go through the middle of our property. And I recommend turning the development down if that is what is planned, because we're not allowing a road to go through. The road there that they're planning is not wide enough. You would have a road underneath our bedroom window, and no one here would want that. There's a business there. The Peets have a business there, and they have customers that come in that use wheelchairs. That's a safety issue. It makes absolutely no sense to try to stuff a road between two houses. We have 3 generations of plumbers here, and none of us are selling. So if you're going to approve the development on thinking in the future that you're going to get a road through the Plummer property, I would turn it down. Everybody's talking about Plummer Properties like we're not here. Well, we're here. We've been here a long time. My grandfather lived in that house, served in the Navy in World War II, and someone just arbitrarily says, I'm putting a road through it, and take down the property value, because who would buy it? No one here would want that. Now, I think that talking about a stub road is, I'm guessing that the development was having trouble with traffic issues to even come up with a stub road. I wasn't approached about putting a road through our property. And it would be just like somebody saying, I need extra parking for my cars. I'm going to start using your driveway. You don't need it. So that's my point. My point is, if the stub road to take it through the property, the Plummer Properties, which it's a working farm, it gets tilled as a non-starter, and it's a no-go. So I just want to make that very clear that that's not a possibility. So just wanted to thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Plummer.
you.
Yes, Terry.
Thank you. Blue, could you put the slide number 8 on the display before we start my clock? Oops.
Yep, thank you very much. Okay, good. I think this will help everybody. Okay, so my comments relate to the recommendation 18 and 19 of the Planning Commission, which are dealing with future interconnectivity. And basically, this follows up directly into what Mr. Plummer just said. I would like to invite you to think about the notion of interconnectivity in the context of this particular property, and also to think about what interconnectivity is intended to achieve. Like everything else in our code and in the comprehensive plan, ultimately, interconnectivity is intended to make Lewis a nicer place for the residents and the visitors. And in this particular case, interconnectivity with the Plummer property would have the exact opposite effect. Conditions 18 and 19 leave open the possibility that down the road, the internal street of this development will serve as a connector a connector road between Kings Highway and Savannah Road. I cannot think of a worse possible idea than to have people who have lived for 10 years or more in a quiet cul-de-sac to all of a sudden be confronted with the possibility of their internal street becoming a connector road between Kings Highway and Savannah Road. This makes absolutely no sense. For this reason, the Planning Commission recommended that, at least for the time being, the stub road of Road C, which is the little piece connecting to the Plummer property at the top, be abandoned. But the Planning Commission recommended that the city keep an easement to allow down the road, and down the road, I'm afraid, means after Mr. Plummer's death, your father, the possibility of reopening this, this connection. This is a terrible idea. The city should not ask to keep an easement at this place. If you look at this corner area, this is right next to the swimming pool, there should be trees there. And this area should never, ever be reopened. Not only should it not be reopened, but it will never be reopened. We are engaging here in an exercise in futility. You know very well, everybody knows that 10 years from now or 5 years from now,
Here
when
you have
people
30 seconds left.
have in there and have their kids, you will not be able to establish the connectivity. Second thing, if there is no connectivity, the city should not take ownership of the internal road. And the reason it should not take ownership is because this is not going to be a connector road, and there is no reason for the taxpayer of the city to pay for the electricity, to pay for the maintenance of that road. It is currently private.
Thank you.
It should stay private, and the city, which is looking for cost saving, should save money by just leaving this property in the ownership of the HOA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any more comments?
Good evening. My name is Bill Carpenter. I live on Debris Circle, and just a short comment. Our concern on Debris Circle is that, as the council has indicated, the crisis that's going to occur at this intersection of trying to get cars in and out. It's perceived by us that what is going to happen, particularly at the 3 o'clock change of shift, at the school letting out, those people who are coming out of this development are generally going to turn right because they can't get into traffic. When they turn right, the next place they're going to look to turn is Debris Circle. And Debris Circle is going to be impacted by this. I don't have a solution for it, but I think it is a concern that the council, not only Debris Circle, but the roads thereafter are potentially going to be impacted. But I think Debris Circle, if you want to go to, at the moment, if you want to go to Kings Highway and you're coming out on Savannah and you can't turn right, or if you can't turn left, you're going to turn right and come down Debris Circle. So we just asked that that thought be incorporated in your consideration of the application.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thoughtful.
So, Blue, do we have comments online or question? Any hands raised? Can we go to the...
Hello, hello.
Hello, please identify yourself.
I'm Gail Van Gilder. I live at 516 East Cape Shores Drive.
Hello,
And
Gail.
I just think there's a big disconnect here to begin, because what we experience on the ground as residents is not what DelDOT is telling us in terms of the numbers they're showing us. So we need to figure out why that is. First of all, our peak hours in Lewis may not be DelDOT's peak hours. I think they said 7 to 9 in the morning was a peak hour. If that's correct, that's the hour when I would go out because I might be able to get out to Route 1 at that time or get to a doctor's appointment. Whereas you get to 10 o'clock, you can't go anywhere. So I stay home. And when you do, you go down Kings Highway, you can't get through Kings Highway, you turn around, you go across DeVries and over to Savannah, and then you can, you may or may not be able to get through Savannah, and you keep dumping more traffic on the road, and we're not going to be able to go anywhere. Has anyone ever thought about how many downtowns across the country have failed because customers could not get to the downtowns because the roads were too congested to get there? And therefore, people go and they shop at the new developments, the new stores where they have big parking lots, the restaurants that have parking lots, because they can't get to them. And it's time for the city of Lewis to think about this, because this is something that was always a big concern of Ted Becker's and our former mayor, and we shouldn't forget that because he's no longer with us. Another point is that in the numbers, did DelDOT include the residents of the lodge, or did they include the residents and the employees? The employees, there's a lot of employees with shifts that they come and go on at different times of day. What are the hours when that happens? What happens when Kings Highway is backed up? The employees get let out, they cut through Dutchman's and try to go out Savannah. Were those numbers incorporated into the combined number that DelDOT came up with? And I'm just not convinced that DelDOT has the right numbers and is working with what we are actually experiencing on the ground day to day. And we all know that as residents. And then I am not in favor of using the fee in place of a TIS or TOA, because I don't think that even if we took that money and used it for an area-wide study, that it would do anything to solve our immediate problem that we have with this development, or these 3 developments all coming out at this exit. By the time we ever got that information, it would, I don't really think it would be terribly helpful. I would rather see the transportation impact study done or the operational analysis, rather than have a fee in place of that we would use for an area-wide study. I think that's a bad idea. And as
Gail,
far
I'm
as
sorry, but we have to move on. We're 30 seconds over.
one thing in closing then, I will say to you that I would strongly recommend that, in all due respect to DelDOT, who I know works very hard at this, that we consider hiring an independent traffic consultant to analyze the numbers and look at this independently and make sure that everything is correct and all the things we're talking about are taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you, Gail.
Okay, do we have any other further comments? Alan?
Thank you. If you would indulge me before Blue starts the clock. I just want to clarify.
Please identify yourself.
Alan Roth, 437 Kings Highway. I just want to clarify a code of conduct issue that I've consulted with Alex on. Several months before I was appointed to the Planning Commission, I spoke at the Planning Commission's public hearing on this development, and I submitted 2 written public comments. And so I'm speaking tonight strictly as a private citizen, with the understanding that if you were to decide to send this case back to the Planning Commission, I would have to recuse myself, because I've previously expressed my personal views on this issue. So with that said, Blue, if it would be possible to put that diagram back up that Thierry had as well, that might help with my comments. That's it. Yeah. No, it was there. Okay.
before you start, Mr. Roth, Blue, what page is that image, that site plan? 8? Okay, thank you. I just wanted that in my notes so I could look at it again in the future. Thank you.
All right. I'm focused on condition 21 regarding the connection of this development to Kings Highway through what amounts to the lodge's parking lot, but for very different reasons than Mr. Hutt. It's an unsafe idea that violates the city code and the comprehensive plan. 650 cars a day, 397 already anticipated from Dutchman's Harvest, and now, with no traffic study, and I'll explain that if you want, at least 248 more from Overfall Preserve will access Kings Highway by driving through the lodge's narrow roadway. At a senior facility, you know that accidents are almost inevitable. Since Mr. Hutt referred to the city's governing documents, the code requires that, quote, an assessment of compatibility between the proposed development with adjacent area land uses be conducted, unquote. No such assessment was made here. The code says, quote, where conflicts are anticipated, site design provisions that screen or separate such areas should be utilized as part of the site plan, unquote. That requirement has been ignored here. It's not the city's job to help the applicant avoid these basic safety expectations. It's the applicant's burden to protect the lodge's residents from the adverse impacts of its development. The comp plan describes not only safe roadways, but also interconnectivity as important Lewis values. The code implements those values by requiring, quote, all street and circulation patterns to provide for the safe, efficient, and convenient movement of vehicular and pedestrian traffic, unquote. But read Mr. Schell's January 17th letter. He rejects any responsibility for interconnectivity. Instead, he's already anticipating using condition 21 as an excuse to turn these into gated communities. The applicant wanted the commission to believe the Plummer property would inevitably provide connectivity to Kings Highway. Then the Plumbers got wind of it and made clear that there ain't gonna be no road run through their property. The applicant's connectivity plan was unserious from the very get-go as they snuck around behind the Plumber's back, both here in the city and at DelDOT. Now, there is a solution here, but the applicant is hoping you won't take a closer look at the very potential opportunities there are next door at the Warrington parcel. And there are many opportunities with that parcel next door at the Warringtons, and I don't want to get overly personal here, but I have observed the Warringtons sitting at all of these meetings and all of these hearings and consulting with Mr. Hutt. So I have to assume that they have some stake in the outcome of these proceedings and some ability to affect the outcome of these proceedings. And because that might require the scratching of the 5 units beneath the swimming pool next to the Warrington parcel, there perhaps is another solution that gets you connectivity to Kings Highway. But that also requires some more discussion with DelDOT. And I'm wrapping up, Mr. Chairman. But if the city wants to do that, it may require discussing with DelDOT the fact that the city believes it's a lot safer for our residents at the lodge than whatever problems DelDOT thinks there are over there. And I dare DelDOT to challenge the city and say, no, you've got to endanger the lodge residents because we don't like running through that Warrington parcel. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't think we have any more online. Please.
Hi, my name's Juliette Burkhaw, and I am at 65 DeVries Circle. And I wanted to back up what Bill Carpenter said earlier about cars coming through DeVries Circle. It's happening now. It's just going to increase if we add another 230 houses to the 2 properties that are being built on right now. I also agree that it is a very it seems to me like it's a very unsafe situation to expect people to wind their way through a neighborhood to get out to Kings Highway. But it's going to be a natural occurrence. It happens at our street, it happens at the other streets below us, closer to the city. I think when the city was planned, there was planning involved. You know, they planned for people to get from Savannah to Kings Highway. For these neighborhoods, that planning didn't occur for whatever reason. There wasn't any plan in effect to get from point A to point B. And people want to get to Kings Highway. They're not, you can't get everywhere you need to go just going down Savannah. So I don't know what the answer is, but I do think there needs to be connectivity, safe connectivity. I don't necessarily think that it needs to be the plumber's property, but there must be other solutions, or maybe in the future, the Planning Commission needs to consider these kinds of problems, you know, potential problems in the future when they're considering other neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't have
No, that's
anything
fine.
planned
Thank
to
you
say.
very much. It's fine.
So it wasn't very organized, but
No.
Thank you.
It was very
You
clear.
too.
You made your point.
Thank you.
My name is Bob Heffernan, 510 Railroad Avenue. I think I'd like to talk about something that we don't like to talk about. Sewage. It's a known number in BPW that summertime holiday weekends, our population swells from 3,000 to 12,000. That doesn't really count the people who, you know, just wade into the water.
Are you still on the sewage topic? No, go ahead, Bob.
Or those that go home early.
Yeah.
12,000, but that kind of is at least my data point on the traffic, what we have to deal with, because, you know, those are the days also when all those new houses will be occupied. And I rarely agree with Gail Van Gilder, but I certainly do that traffic study ought to be done completely and comprehensively. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Yep, Vice Mayor, I just want to comment that for those people who cannot be here tonight but have submitted comments, that all of us look at those. So there have been a lot of written comments in on this.
We're going to hopefully get more written comments
Yes, exactly.
as we leave the record
Yeah,
open.
exactly. I just didn't want people
Yeah.
to think that you have to show up always, and you're the ones that we listen to everybody's.
Right. So to that point, are there any more comments from the public? Okay, seeing or hearing none, and there's nothing online. I think we should establish a date where we're going to accept public comments online to the city. Let's get our calendars out and see what we can. So are we thinking about Friday, April 11th?
I was thinking about May 2nd
Want to go that far? Okay. Oh, we're thinking about doing this.
at the May council meeting.
What
May
would?
12th, May 2nd would be public comment, would close at 4 p.m.
Why would we not be taking this up on April 12th?
because of the time frame,
What's the problem with the time frame?
the short window.
Right.
for public comment.
The short window from this hearing
Yes.
to,
Mhm. It can be on the April agenda.
I
I'm not-
actually like that idea of us extending the public comment period.
look, I have a issue with that in a sense that this applicant has been in front of our planning commission a number of times, and they have their own timetable, and I think, I was concerned that we didn't even have a planning commission meeting in December after a very important November meeting, and I just, we all have rights here, and I don't want to put the applicant in a bad position because of future contracts they may have, and adding another month to an issue that has been discussed pretty extensively in public hearings and in the community. It doesn't seem doesn't seem to make, I don't understand why we cannot have, we're here today on the 31st. We have a full 2 weeks to the 11th.
Does the 11th to the 14th allow enough time to review public comment?
And we have two members of council who are not here, although we have a quorum, but they are, we have one person who we know is traveling out of town and is gonna be gone for, I've been told, a 2-week period.
What about a halfway point between those two dates? Come up with
Now,
something.
how can, if we can go to, let's say, extend comments to, what I'm trying to get at here is, I don't want to delay the decision any longer than it needs to be delayed. And I don't know if the applicant is willing to make a comment about that, if they're willing to wait for May. But it seems, you know, we've had plenty of opportunity for public comment, and I just don't want to unnecessarily delay an applicant who has been patient and has been working in good faith with the city for months now. Mr. Hutt, do you have any comment on when, if a May date would create any kind of hardship for you? I mean, my guess is you prefer April 12th, but I don't.
Certainly that is the case. As you've noted, we've been in this process for a long time already, and so, and as you also noted, there's been a lot of ample opportunity for the public to comment, including the fact that the Planning Commission's record was reopened to allow additional public comment to come in at that time. The Deputy Mayor's suggestion of timing seemed appropriate to the applicant.
How about a compromise in between those two dates? What else could we do in April?
There's the 24th, it's the workshop, we can make it a special meeting.
Yep.
Let's do that.
Hmm?
How about that?
I like that idea.
Okay.
That's it.
So what about public comment till the 11th?
Yep, I think the 11th allows plenty of time, gives us a little less than 2 weeks to digest. Actually, a bit more than that.
So the public comment period would close on April 11th at 4
4
o'clock.
p.m.
At 4 p.m. And we're gonna take it up at, what is the date again
It
of
would
the?
be April 24th, 10 o'clock,
Thank you.
in council chambers.
So for clarity related to the different area-wide studies, all of those, how are we gonna get that information about the right request to make? I mean, I think there's an interest from the public to understand the different traffic studies or operational analysis or area-wide. Can we get some clarity from DelDOT on timing of those, how long they take, just,
Yeah.
I just feel like we need a little more information for council deliberations on that.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Councilperson Marasco.
Can work on it.
Yeah.
Are we good then, Chair?
Yep.
We're good? Close the hearing?
April 24th, right?
So April 11th,
For
4
the
p.m.
for
public
the
comment closes.
deadline for public comment. April 24th, that'll be our public workshop, but also a special meeting where we will consider preliminary approval for the site plan.
Yes.
Great. I think that works.
Yeah.
Okay, if we don't have any more comment or,
You can go
Alex?
ahead and close the public hearing and then adjourn if you'd like.
yep. All right, this public hearing is now closed, and I think, Mayor and Council, we are adjourned.
We are.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.